Hey everybody, it's been a while and I just want to make this video because it has been a while and I just want to share my opinions and thoughts and my views on a few things. This is not financial advice, this is not anything to be taken seriously, this is just my opinion. We are having a discussion, nothing more, and I encourage you to do your own research, please. This is just entertainment. Take this as a joke at best. So with that being said, I will dive into this. This is not going to be a coherent video. This is not going to be structured. I am going to be rambling on the top of my head about certain things. This will generally be about like Chinese companies, Chinese economy, and just US and China relationships, so what I think about these types of things and whatever's on the top of my head. So let's go into China. So as of 2021, China's population is 1.4 billion people. And I just wanted to go over some of the news because I don't really know if some of the information being available is completely honest, or if they're half truths, or if that, yeah. So okay, let's look into this. Chinese travelers, China's winter. I don't know. Like, it's this one, I'm just gonna give off my general point of views before I click on things. Yeah, it's Lunar New Year's, and there's a bunch of people traveling throughout China in order to visit friends and family. Yeah, so if it's snowing and there's 1.4 billion people, you can find like snowstorms. The news generally shows negative things though, in order to, because negative views and negative media gets more attention and interactions than positive news. That's why it's always negative. Blizzard disrupts Lunar New Year travel for millions in China. Yeah, it's like, yeah, like, is it really that bad though? Like, maybe it is bad for some, but like, it's probably not as bad as like the headlines are making it seem. I mean, just imagine if you were there in your situation. It's like you are visiting family in America, and there's a blizzard or a snowstorm. Yeah, it's gonna suck, but like, it's not the end of the world. Right, it's really not, right? China stocks rally eases as investors awaits for more policy support. I think, um, from what I had seen, the Chinese government is planning on spending a certain amount of money, perhaps, to bolster their stock market. And I don't really know if like that's a good idea because to me, the US stock market is so overvalued that it may be worthwhile just like waiting for that bubble to pop or to come down, or when it overheats, perhaps like these investors will you know cycle back into Chinese equities. I know you're probably thinking you can't trust the Chinese government, you can't trust the Chinese economy, you can't. Well, okay, first of all, you can say the same thing. Like, you can't really trust the United States government. Like, can you? Like, we voted a orange. We voted Trump in because we couldn't trust our government. We thought he was gonna drain the swamp. So it's like really hypocritical. It's like, you can't even trust our own United States government, but you're worried about the Chinese government. It's like the same thing with TikTok and Instagram. They're pretty much the same. They both use predatory algorithms and pretty predatory methods of business in order to create profits, right? Yet, when Meta does it, we kind of give it an okay, but when TikTok does it, we don't. But they're both very predatory in nature. Just like a lot of US companies, whether it be the sugar industry or the gas industry or the oil industry or the automobile industry or just about anything that Apple, like a lot of the companies in the United States, are very predatory and they're very evil and corrupt. And so is our government. And there's a lot of corruption in our government, whether at a state level or at a federal level or at a domestic or international level, right? We've done a lot of terrible things, whether it be at the Native Americans' expense or the Hawaiians or whatever is going on in the Middle East. or in Ukraine and Russia. It's like we stick our hands in a lot of things. We claim to be free market capitalists, yet we impose a lot of tariffs that are anti-free market and anti-trade, because rather than innovate and compete, we put on tariffs. We did that with China. We did it with Japan. And if you look at China and how we're treating them, it's very identical to how we treated Japan when they were transitioning into exporting high quality goods like the United States. So it's very identical, and but I would argue because China's demographics so much higher that they're just going to be able to outcompete at levels that is much higher than Japan. But it's like everything we criticize China for. It's like some of the criticisms we make aren't even fair, and then some of the criticisms are things we need to like we could criticize ourselves for as well as Americans. So, but Chinese stocks, in my opinion, are so undervalued compared to United States stocks that I don't know if like the markets were actually rational, then I feel like Chinese equity should go up in value while US goes down. But I do think that the United States and Western allies could be and have been for years now intentionally lowering down the stock markets of any of its competitors in order to, well, hamper growth. The United States always wants to hamper growth towards China, and this can be done in many ways: abusive trades, tariffs, wars. And another means would be to like negatively impact our equity markets. Because the higher your stock is, the higher your market cap, and the more access to capital these companies have, which allows to pay off debts and further their growth. So, if you're the United States and you're an imperialist and your goal is to secure your number one seat, well, if you can't really outcompete your competitors, then the best thing you can do is make sure they don't compete with you by beating them up. And you can't go into war with China, because if you do, like a physical war, well, I think if the United States and China went into a war, like a physical war, first of all, there's mutual destruction, right? Like you can say whatever you want, like, oh, there's nukes and anti-nuke missiles, whatever. I don't care. Like that's semantics. Like there's mutually assured destruction between both countries if we were to have a nuclear war. Okay? Secondly, a proxy war by using Taiwan as its pawn would be foolish, because the United States can't afford that. We cannot sponsor so many wars globally. And I don't think China's going to allow it to happen. Like, if we cut trade with China, the United States is going to go through something worse than a Great Depression. So, it's like, even if we did have a war and we could win it, it's like we already lost because, well, we had casualties. And like, yeah, maybe China could have more, but we don't know that. And secondly, we can't afford to have that happen. Like, no one's gonna agree to a war. Like, no one's gonna want that. Okay, so you can't really have a trade war with China too long and too much, because the United States, they're not in a position that they once had. So even if you had like small proxy wars and physical wars that did not include nukes, like the average American is never going to fight a physical war, because they don't even believe in the imperialist system, nor do they want to support the military industrial complex. when you look at the United States stats for its recruitments, they're not hitting their numbers, and I don't think Americans are as blindly patriotic as they used to be because there's so much access to media, different opinions, different perspectives, and there are some people in a vocal minority who want war, who think we'd win, but they're never going to fight the war. They can speculate that, oh, yeah, the United States would win. But these are the same kinds of people who will never pick up a weapon, who will never fight. So, I personally think if we had a war with China, I gotta say, I think the United States would lose. Because, one, the Asian American population is not gonna stand for it. They're probably gonna be really anti war. They're probably gonna be taking on the brunt of the racism that we saw, even during COVID. So they're not gonna be for the war. And then if that's like 7 to 10% of your population, I really doubt that the average American is gonna want to fight this war either. Especially when you're not hitting your draft numbers or when you're not hitting your recruitment numbers. So who's gonna fight your war? You know? So the only war that the United States can really have with China is an economic war. By setting up like anti-trade and anti-free market capitalist types of restrictions on trade, like a 22-25% tariff on electric vehicles. But that's not going to stop China. So it'll slow down whatever endeavors that China has, but it's not going to stop it. That's just a pipe dream. And I think that Americans just have to accept that the world's just going to become more equitable for everyone, whether they like it or not. And I think the sooner we understand that you can't really stop the growth of a sovereign state that's trying to look out for its people, the sooner, people make better decisions financially. And, it could also lead towards global prosperity if we can learn to get along rather than like be envious or jealous. You can't really blame China for competing in a Western economic system, because if the United States set up a imperialist economic system that benefits them, how can you hate a country that plays your game and then does well? You can't. I don't know how you're fooling people to do that, but you can't. So, one way you can do this is by negatively impacting their stock market so they have less access to raise capital. And, China will work around that, whether they pump their stocks up or print more money or export more things. I don't want to go into that too much because this could be a long conversation. But to give my overview on these types of things, I think that this could all be cyclical. You had APEC or APEC, and I think that we're going to see some better days for Chinese equities, just because, one, they're just undervalued. Two, China's GDP, I think it was like 4 or 5%, and that's pretty good. I mean, a lot of the countries globally around the world aren't doing that good. You can say China's GDP is fake, but can you really, first of all, there's a lot of Chinese watchdogs, which means like there's a lot of independent researchers outside of the Chinese government, outside of the United States government, that can fact check this data, so it probably is true. Secondly, can you really trust economic data coming from the United States? Like, it's always changed, and the equations and formulas to calculate these things are always changed as well in order to make things seem better than what they're not, in order to push agendas. Think about it like this: the average American isn't doing so well economically, they feel like things aren't doing so well, yet your president's telling you that everything's good when it's not. So, can you really trust? There's so many complaints about the Chinese government, like, oh, you can't trust the Chinese government. Oh, Evergrande. Oh, real estate crash. Oh, tech crackdown. Oh, company crackdown. Well, a lot of the tech crackdowns we do in China are things that, you know, a lot of people in America wish we could do on American companies that abuse and are its consumer base. All right. A lot of the people in America don't even trust our own government, which is why we voted Donald Trump, who said he was going to drain the swamp. There's a large portion of Americans who don't believe that Joe Biden's even a president. There's a lot of people who don't believe our state, which is probably reflected in your voting outcomes, right? So it's like any criticism we really have towards China, it's like at best hypocritical, and at worst it's like not even true. Like we do so much worse than as the United States. So I don't know. I feel like people in America are really brainwashed. That their opinions and their views and shaped are by, like, they could be engineered in order to think in certain ways that may not even be true to how they inherently think. When all the news is negative about China, when there's blood on the streets, that is something to consider. Let's open up a few of these websites and we'll go from there. I understand that the Chinese do have like a stock market plunge protection team, just like the United States does. But I don't think they have the same mechanisms and tools that like the United States does. Like the United States has things like halt trading and things like that. I don't think the Chinese do. That's something I'd have to look into more, but I don't believe that they do. But please go do your own research on that. They have mechanisms and tools that we don't, and that they have some things that we do. Okay, so Xi Jinping is considering intervention, which is why. But you know that can be by pumping up the markets. But I don't know if you have the United States doing like and its allies doing some kind of like financial hit on the Chinese equities, because like it it could benefit the U.S. a lot by hitting the Chinese financial system. Then is pumping up the Chinese markets the best thing to do? Especially when, I don't know. I'd have to look into that, right? Because you'd have to determine like how much other people rely on their equities, how does their world, how does their country depend on their equities? Like the United States, as this guy says right here. Now, just like here in the United States, in China, the stock market is not the economy. No, no, this is where things are different, I think, because in this article it says, now, just like here in the United States, in China, the stock market is not the economy, but it can tell us something about where the global economy is headed. No, I don't think that's true because, one, United States equities are overvalued, especially when compared to the global equity market. And just because United States stocks are, at least some of them, like the Magnificent Seven and the indexes, while 2,000 other companies may not be performing that well in the stock market, that doesn't, in the U.S. stock market, that doesn't mean that that reflects the health of the economy. But the United States, like this, regardless of how the real economy is doing and how poor it is in the United States, like the United States politicians can say, oh, look at our stock market, it's at all-time highs. Look at our indices, they're at all-time highs. But that doesn't mean that the average American is doing that well. I would actually argue that in China, the stock market isn't as important as it is for the United States. I think that while Chinese equities and the Chinese stock market is important, it doesn't play as a key as an important role as it does for like the average citizen's lives in China immediately versus like the average American and the United States stock market. And if like Chinese stocks are beaten down to the point where it doesn't even where it's like undervalued, that doesn't reflect um, the general economy of where China's headed because stocks aren't always rational. It's a it always goes back to like equilibrium eventually. So I think just by reading this part right here, I would be concerned to say like this could be pro US type of view or very ignorant. Um, because this is implying that United States citizens and Chinese citizens and economy and the way it's structured is the same when it's not. The biggest reason why China's stock markets have taken nosedive, basically since the country's prolonged zero COVID policy ended, the Chinese economy so far has been sluggish and very much disappointing. Again, like with this too, it's not the reason why Chinese stock market hasn't been doing well so well isn't because zero COVID policy ended. You know, it doesn't like if Nvidia, for example, has a revenue of like 27 or 30 billion dollars, but their market cap is like 2 trillion or something, or 1 trillion or something. That doesn't make sense, dude. Like that doesn't mean your United States economy is strong. That just means your stock is just overvalued, and this is for a lot of the Magnificent Seven. If Meta, for example, lays off a large portion of its employees, but they rely on 10% or more on Chinese ad revenue for advertisements for its revenue, that doesn't mean that Meta is a good company that's gonna like keep on having these large growths. It just means that they're cutting costs in order to pump up good numbers. But that doesn't mean it's sustainable. That doesn't mean like the dividends it could offer will always be good, in the next 10 or 20 years. So I don't think I would argue more so that the Chinese stocks have taken a nosedive because the US financial system is playing economic warfare with the Chinese economy, and that by hitting its Chinese equities, that's their way of halting China's growth in order to prevent these Chinese companies from raising capital at the expense of shareholders and investors. Because if Chinese companies had the same PE ratios and same I would say overvalued stock values and high market caps like the U.S. equity counterparts, then without the China discount, I would say that these Chinese companies would be able to outcompete U.S. companies like a Neo or a BYD or a Alibaba. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the main reason why Chinese equities have taken a nosedive is because the U.S. government has strategically attacked the Chinese equity market by discouraging investments by foreign investments at a micro and macro level. That way, you can prevent these companies from having access to capital. Now, that sucks, but, I think that's the main reason why. For starters, the real estate market is absolute mess. Developers Evergrande was just ordered to bankruptcy. Okay, so even with Evergrande, that's been something that's been going on for 3 to 5 years, if not longer. I think the whole concept of ghost cities has been around for a long time, but you also have to understand when you have 700 million people coming out of poverty into middle class, you need to have these ghost cities, quote unquote, because like they may be ghost cities at one point, but people eventually move into it. So when you have people coming from like rural areas of China going into urban areas, you need to have these cities. You need to plan things out because, well, you can't just have a bunch of people come in to the cities without homes being there. It turns into a slum. So you need to have these homes being built. We do this in the United States too. It's like we'll have a town in a rural area that we think's gonna have, I don't know, maybe Tesla comes in there, or a Honda, or even a Chinese company can move in there, a Chinese factory. So what we'll do is that we'll build like a town and apartments and homes that are all empty for years. And we'll use capital from investors. And then, yeah, it'll seem empty like a ghost town or a ghost city, but then people will come in as the means of productions move there as well. So, you know, I also think another thing with the Evergrande is that a lot of its investors are foreign capital. So maybe they want to bail out, you know, maybe the Evergrande thing is, I don't know. I don't feel like the average Chinese person is really is losing sleep over Evergrande because there's 1.4 billion people. So, while in the United States, if something like Evergrande were to impact us, it'll be like a Lehman moment for China because there's 4 billion people. Maybe it's kind of like in the United States, if we had that, it'd be like a Lehman moment. It'd be like being stabbed in the heart, and we'd have to somehow recover. But in China, it can be like stepping on a large nail. You know, I think that's a way to look at it because we may be sensationalizing this more than what it truly deserves in order to push United States agendas. So, you know, if I really think that the United States can't have a war physically with China because they lose domestically and internationally, then the best way to do it is by just, again, like setting up tariffs, hitting their stock market, hitting their equity market, and things like that. But yeah, so and you know that's something to really be criticized as a country if we were to do that towards them. So it's best to distract people and just say, "Oh, Evergrande." That's the red herring, right? You just want to distract people of Evergrande, a red spy balloon, whatever, you know. But let's see. The mama, papa, small retail investors also been taking their money out. Both big Western hedge funds and Chinese retirees are increasingly aware of Chinese government crackdowns on leading companies like e-commerce giant Alibaba. Mm. You know, despite people and investors not liking these crackdowns and a lot of criticisms, I don't know, like I feel like a lot of gamers in the gaming communities wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, a lot of the gaming industry nowadays has been very predatory towards the gaming community. Like they have these loot boxes, they have these daily login things, they have all these predatory, addictive types of systems that keep players spending tons of money and making it very addictive. And I think the Chinese government crackdowns are basically putting the people's needs over profits, which I don't know. I feel like that's not a bad thing. Like there's a lot of predatory practices that the gaming industry does. So, you know, as a regular person, am I really opposed to like these things? Like I don't know. It's like if a lot of these large corporations are taking advantage of the people for profit, like, and the Chinese government stepping down on crackdowns, is that really a bad thing? I don't think so, you know, but I guess if you care about your profits that much over your people's health, then yeah, that sucks for your stocks. But I still think that despite that, if we were to really calculate like future revenues, I really think it'd be hit tremendously. Probably not, you know, but I think a lot of these things are over sensationalized in order to push United States imperialist agendas onto China, which is like, you know, fighting their equity market is one, or financial system. Yeah, like this person says right here that it's not like the collapse in 2008 or even during the COVID period, but it's a pretty big hit. So something like the tech burst of early 2000s is probably better. Yeah, I think that's a little bit more fair analogy because you don't really want to like sensationalize things. But you know, it was interesting how Xi Jinping and Putin, right before the Beijing Olympics, both agreed that Chinese equities and Russian equities and just the global equity market in general are not treated properly when compared to the United States equities that get way too much favoritism. I don't know where the article is, but I did read that somewhere, so I think that's a very interesting opinion, and take that what you with how you will. Yeah, that was a very interesting read. Um, yeah, you know, there's blood on the streets right now. What can you say? Um, so yeah, it's very interesting to me that like when you type in like China, um, it's generally negative news. But I would take all this with a grain of salt, mostly because it's probably not as bad as it seems. A lot of these collapse videos. But it was also interesting how there was $500 billion, I believe, spent on the promotion of anti-China rhetoric and news and propaganda from the United States. So, yeah, you know, I really don't think things are bad as they seem on the news. I think that the American media likes to make things and pump a lot of negative propaganda. I mean, look at this guy. Look at him. Do we really need to discuss news? I bet you post videos every day about something bad. You know, they've been predicting the Chinese collapse for like 30 plus years, yet it never collapsed. But, you know, if you really, any criticisms you see towards China, just do some research and then you'll find that it really doesn't carry that much merit. Um, it's like, okay, well, does the United States really care about human rights, whether it be from slavery, taking state sovereignty, using countries as proxy war, supporting authoritarian regimes in order to push a imperialist agenda? Like, we do a lot of terrible things in the name of democracy, you know. What about the thing going on in Palestine and Israel? It's very controversial things, and it's like we pick sides that not many Americans agree with necessarily. We use the Ukraine lives to fight a proxy war. We expand our military bases in the South China Sea. We do all these things that don't really make sense. We exploit weaker countries or smaller economies that use the U.S. dollar system, right? So we're very exploitative. We are using an imperialist system that is slowly being dismantled. So, like, when did we ever care about Uyghurs? When did we ever care about Muslims? You know. Um, I mean, maybe I shouldn't go on Reddit. It's pretty bad. But yeah, it's like I don't know, Tiananmen Square. It's like there's so many negative things we could say about China, but then I could find like 10,000 other things to be more critical about the United States towards. I mean, I don't see China starting wars, and I don't see China bombing other countries, and I don't see China killing hundreds of thousands of people. I don't see China exploiting people globally through the financial system. I don't see the, at least not the levels the United States has done, you know. And the BRICS or the Belt and Road Initiative. How is developing economies that the United States never wanted to touch because they're too risky? How is that a bad thing? They need a capital. They need infrastructure. You know, it's like I feel like in order for the United States to push these imperialist agendas, they need to convince that their people and or the constituents that everything they're doing is great, but it's not. And it's like, despite the average American not having faith in the government, not having faith in their politicians, not having faith in the country, knowing the evil history, knowing the evil things we do currently, it's like we have cognitive dissonance, and then we just like say China's bad, Russia's bad, but we don't even try to understand them because United States propaganda. So yeah, I think that the reason why Chinese equities are hit so hard is because the main reason why is because the United States cannot have a physical war with China because we lose. We would lose because internally, Americans don't want to fight a war that they don't care about. Americans don't care about Han Chinese in Taiwan. They don't care about Ukrainians in Ukraine. They don't care about Muslims in anywhere. You know? I mean, a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't. They just care about themselves and their family and those around them. But the United States would never win a war with China because we would lose domestically first and then internationally second. There's either mutually assured destruction or no war because the United States would just never have a war that they're not going to win. Well, I mean, they have, but the ramifications would be too tremendous. So I really doubt the United States would have a war with China. So all they can really do is try to slow down its growth so our industries in the United States can be competitive with China's. That's just going to beat us no matter what over time. So if the United States has to take a multi-pronged approach at halting China's growth, whether it be through anti-free market capitalist anti-free trade policies and tariffs, that's one way. Encouraging foreign direct investments to lower down, that's another way. Then so be it, but it's only gonna slow down the growth. It can't stop things at the end, because if you don't let China's economy grow, there's other like environmental issues that could occur from that. There's also like mass immigration that could occur from that, or emigration, right? So it's like the world economically and geopolitically is very complex. So I think Americans have this pipe dream where they think like that they can somehow like defeat the evil communists or whatever, even though China's probably not that communist as what Americans think. But you know, it's like you can't really stop China's growth, because if you do, then there will be economic and social ramifications that I would argue the United States cannot afford to have at a domestic and international level. And if you really were to mess with China at those levels, then it's World War III. Okay? Now, I know this has been me rambling most of the part. I think perhaps I will make more thorough videos with more research and more structure into it. I will try to better defend my points, but this was just me making up a follow-up video based on things that I've seen. But overall, I think things will get better. I think the news just sensationalizes things in order to get clicks and views. But I think things will get better because there's only two options we really have. It's either one, we have arguing and fighting in our world, which will happen, but there's either the extreme of like World War III, or there's moving forward as a global society, whether people like it or not. And there's going to be winners and losers, but it's going to be eventually towards world peace, at least much more than what we've had. And when you really look at the world, things have been much more peaceful than maybe 1,000 years ago, right? So, you know, it's like we're gonna have like hiccups, and we're gonna have like crashes here and there, but we're not gonna die, and we're not gonna have these catastrophic events. It may seem like that because that's the way the news paints things, but you can't stop China's growth. You cannot stop that, because if you do, you're gonna have a bunch of like, well, you're gonna have an economic global collapse, because you're gonna have mass immigration. I wish, perhaps I'll make a video about that, but it's much easier if you just study geopolitics, economics, um, geography, demography, and then like it'd be easier to have the discussion. But I feel like when I make these videos, I have to like, I don't know, I can't even talk at like at a 101 level, because it's, I don't know, like it would, like at a 101 level, if you took that class for example, or a two, you know what I mean, like you would understand that, like, oh yeah, we can't have China's collapse, because if we did, 1.4 billion people would suffer at um, varying degrees, and so would the United States, because we're in a globalized economy where people are interconnected. Then there'd be mass immigration, and then there'd be all these other things, and other countries would be affected, other economies would be affected, because things are interwoven. You see what I'm saying? So it's really hard to explain, but I wouldn't pay too much mind to the news. You get a more realistic idea of things on how they're going when you actually visit, when you look at things from a micro level, because you're actually seeing like the day-to-day realities of things. So with that being said, this is not financial advice. Please do your own research, and maybe I will go more into that, but things are not as bad as what they seem, in my opinion. Okay?